So a friend of mine and I were talking the other day. We were talking about what everybody talks about right now. What are you streaming? This happens to be a person who I've been friends with since sophomore year of high school. We spent most weekends in high school at one another's house. His mom calls me son number 2. You get the picture. I've known this guy pretty well for a while, and he's known me pretty well. And he says to me, yeah, I've started streaming The West Wing. It's so good, I need it around these times considering, who's really in the Oval Office. And friends, I was shocked. For 2 decades, he has heard me say that The West Wing is one of the best written, most inspiring television shows ever. He knows I love that show. And now, after years of my recommending it, he has the nerve to tell me how good it is. So, I forgave him, and simply welcomed him into the loving embrace of this phenomenal show. For those of you who were with us last week when I waxed so fondly about Star Trek: The Next Generation, you might be wondering, is TJ just planning to preach about television shows from now on? No, don't worry. The answer is yes. No. I mean, come on, everyone. We are streaming these days. Many of us are looking at screens all day. I'm literally preaching to 2 screens right now just to speak to all of you. Many of us, watching movies and television shows. Last weekend, this same friend and I synced up our TVs to watch Trolls World Tour with his kids 6,000 miles away and 6 time zones apart. I even dozed off a little bit and they had to wake me up. It was pretty standard behavior, actually, for a weekend afternoon. Now, in preaching school, they teach you to preach what you know. And right now, screens and what is streaming on those screens is what I know. Okay. So there are many, many amazing episodes of The West Wing. But my favorites are when the writer of the series, well, for the first 5 years, Aaron Sorkin, who actually holds a degree in musical theater, when Sorkin has his characters geek out about musical theater like only someone who really studied it can. Now, in one of my favorite scenes, characters are discussing which Gilbert and Sullivan musical a certain song came from. For those of you who don't know, Gilbert and Sullivan, they were a British team of musical writers. They wrote operettas, actually, and those were a forerunner to what we now know as the American musical theater. Their most famous musicals were probably Pirates of Penzance and HMS Pinafore. Now, these characters in the show are arguing about which show the song comes from, and one character says, no, it's the one about duty. And the other character, a lover of Gilbert and Sullivan, responds quickly, they're all about duty. And that character was right. All of both of their musicals are about duty. In fact, plots of plays and movies, of video games, of so much of the media we consume that is so popular is driven by duty. And particularly, they're driven by what so many bring to mind when they think about duty, the armed services. Now, even many of the Gilbert and Sullivan stories had military characters, and the responsibilities of those characters that they had to others through military service, their duties, created important motivations and plot points in the stories. And some of the finest dramas ever written for stage and screen are about duty. Many don't know that Aaron Sorkin also wrote the stage play for A Few Good Men, which went on to success on the big screen. Now, in this month, here at the church, we're talking about truth as our spiritual theme in chalice circles and covenant groups, here in worship. And as I think about how I use the word duty, when I think about the ways it's used today by many people, one of the primary ways it is used most in the realm of military service. Now, Call of Duty is the name of one of the most popular video game franchises ever produced. And for those of you who don't really think about video games And for those of you who don't think you really should have to think about video games, you really should. See, the metrics for measuring gameplay for just one installment of this Call of Duty franchise called Modern Warfare count not in the thousands, not in the hundreds of thousands, not even in the merely millions. The installment of Call of Duty called Modern Warfare at the end of last year had passed $1 billion in sales and accounted for 500 million total hours of play by users. You think you got a streaming problem at your house. Though there are not public numbers available on the number of actual individual users or players, the game's maker said publicly that an earlier, less popular installment had 50 million unique players worldwide. And that is just one of the titles in the Call of Duty catalog. Now, I would never generalize my congregation, but many of you listening to this probably have never played Call of Duty. It's a hunch, I know. So I'll tell you, the whole point of the games, as I understand it, I have not played it either, is to replicate in dramatic fashion the high points, the flash points of military fighting, of warring. People who engage in the game are constantly launching missions, engaging the enemy, living on the adrenaline that comes with that work. To say that these games and so much other media glamorize warring and warfare is an understatement like few others. It should not be called Call of Duty. It should be called Call of the Wild. It's just that that title was taken already. Now, to my knowledge, there's not a role to play in that game where you prepare and then teach a life-saving class for people, say, aboard a nuclear submarine. To my knowledge, there is not a role to play in that game where you take a medical history of a warrior, consider their stress, both physical and emotional, prescribe a course of treatment, and follow up with them. To my knowledge, there is not a role in that game where you choose readings and hymns for a memorial you have to preside over, where you console a mourning family or play taps for those you lay to rest. So it is good that we are here in the month of Truth, friends, because there might not be an area of life more people get wrong in the media than the duty that service members undertake with their very lives. I asked a friend who served in the Army for a time and now works at a Veteran Affairs hospital on the East Coast if he ever played Call of Duty. And what followed was a text conversation that ranged widely about many of the things we've already discussed here. He said that games like this glamorize and really dehumanize the truth of the persons who are warriors, who serve in our armed forces. And his questions for anyone who thinks they know about military duty or who thanks him for his service, his questions are, what are you doing to bring my friends home? Do you know who your congresspersons are and what they are doing to bring my friends home? Have you taken the time to ask your congresspeople that question? He went on really to equate the saying, thank you for your service, and then not doing anything to bring about an end to war or to help those who fought in those wars. He compared that to a person who prays for the poor, but then does nothing to help the poor. He is too kind a person to say this, but the world has a name for that kind of prayer: hypocrisy. His thoughts reminded me of the question, or the quotation so often attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, who is said to have said, "Truly I tell you, you must preach the gospel with all your heart. If necessary, use words." The implication of this saintly instruction is one that we, here, as a Unitarian Universalist community, we like. As a UU community, we are made of people of action who want to take part in a common, meaningful solution to the ills we see in the world. And many of us don't pray with words, but we do take actions. And because we're looking at the theme of truth this month, we really have to be clear that tomorrow is what the U.S. government decided, somewhat recently really, is Memorial Day. Now, I know from worship planning and from being a human being that it seems very strange to have Memorial Day so early this year. It just moves around on us. In fact, this is the earliest Memorial Day can ever be recognized, because May 31st this month is a Sunday. But until 1968, Memorial Day was celebrated on May 30th. And I have said this before, it was for a reason. Through the honorable burial of and laying for rest of those who fall in battle is a tradition that dates back millennia. The day called Decoration Day, now Memorial Day, that we know, began after the U.S. Civil War in 1968, when General John A. Logan of the Union Army decreed that May 30 would be the day to lay flowers and pay respects at the graves of some 620,000 soldiers who died in the Civil War. And in his words, whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet churchyard in the land. He chose this day, and chose it well, because it was one of the only days he could find on the calendar when there was not an anniversary for a battle during the Civil War. It was a day when peace reigned over the battlefields and encampments for a day throughout the years of the war. And many veterans still want to return to celebrating Memorial Day on May 30th. In fact, every year for 20 years, at the beginning of every session of Congress, it was the decorated World War II veteran, Senator Daniel K. Inouye of Hawaii, who introduced legislation to return Memorial Day to May 30. He did this every year until 2012, when he himself died. Okay. So now Reverend TJ is taking away our weekend fun we had planned. It's bad enough he quoted a saint right in the middle of a UU sermon, but messing with Memorial Day is going too far, right? I know. I know how it feels to have something you're planning, something you think, altered. But imagine going to a foreign land because it's your duty, and serving your fellow warriors with honor and distinction. Imagine coming home to see the holes that you tried to mend in your fellow warriors when doing your duty, the lives you could and the lives you couldn't save. Imagine seeing them depicted as a way people get or lose points in a video game that has more than $1 billion for its maker to its name. Imagine your boss claimed status as a wartime president when a few notes from his daddy bought kept him clear from actual war. There may be no worse place for hypocrisy to rear its loathsome head than in the face of duty. I am sure President Bartlett from the West Wing would never have dreamed of such a show, but we are not in a television show with pinging one-liners about Victorian-era musicals. As much as one person in particular wishes we were, we're also not in a reality show. We mark this week with the solemn occasion of remembering our fallen soldiers. Our own hymnal here, Singing the Living Tradition, holds this poem of memory for us this day. The young dead soldiers do not speak. Nevertheless, they are heard in the still houses. Who has not heard them? They have a silence that speaks for them at night and when the clock counts. They say, "We were young, we have died. Remember us." They say, "We have done what we could, but until it is finished, it is not done." They say, "We have given our lives, but until it is finished, no one can know what our lives gave." They say, "Our deaths are not ours. They are yours. They will remain, and they will mean what you make them." They say, "Whether our lives and our deaths were for peace and a new hope, or for nothing we cannot say. It is you who must say this. They say, we leave you our debts. Give them their meaning. Give them an end to the war and a true peace. Give them a victory that ends the war and a peace afterwards. Give them their meaning. We were young, they say. We have died. Remember us. In this month, when we look at the truths before us, it is right and it is fitting that we take hold of this work written by the first Librarian of Congress, Archibald MacLeish. And it is fitting because it is so with librarians that truth is an open book. Because my friend, who I must tell you helped me with this sermon out of the graciousness of his beautiful heart, might have spoken the most truth when he said he wished that people would just read a book about what war is really like. He was worried, of course, about sounding like some kind of elitist for recommending people read a book. I didn't tell him that this church has at least 3 book groups that I already know about. But a part of my heart broke hearing this very basic request. See, I love my friend for many reasons. Yes, he played goalie in soccer like I did. Yes, he knows the entire dance to Thriller. Yes, he cared for that same childhood friend who just discovered the West Wing when that friend was going through one of the hardest times of his life. And yes, he is a fiercely loving husband and father. And yes, he loves justice and mercy. But I also love him simply because he answers the real call of duty every day to care for those who serve this country with the best years of their youth, the best years of their health, and in some cases with their lives. We were young, they say. We have died. Remember us. I pray that perhaps on the real Memorial Day, on May 30th, we might remember the streaming of our young into the armed forces, into harm's way. We were young, they say. We have died. Remember us. I pray that perhaps on the real Memorial Day, we might remember those who died and the tears streaming down the faces of the families at bedsides and at gravesides. We were young, they say. We have died. Remember us. I pray that perhaps on the real Memorial Day, we might one day see every one of those 50 million players decide to repay every one of those 500 million hours they gave a game, go streaming into their congressperson's office, demanding an end to war, go streaming into their libraries to learn more than they did, not just about war, but really what it means to have peace in our day, one day that may come, go streaming into military cemeteries to decorate the burial sites of those whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet, churchyard in the land. And I pray that we do this with love. For that, my friends, is our duty. May it ever be so. Blessed be, and amen.